I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender. Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
So I've got John Acuff on the line, author of Quitter, Start, and the recent Do-Over, as well as stuff Christians like from way back. John, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on, James.
John, let me first ask this. I want to talk about your most recent book, Do-Over, but your very first book you wrote, Stuff Christians Like, and you wrote that when you were still kind of at the cubicle job. Am I right?
Yeah, I worked for Auto Trader in Atlanta as the technical kind of writer.
And when you wrote that book, did that give you like this extra kind of cool factor at work?
Yeah, temporarily. Like a handful of people knew about it, and they would say like, "Oh, are you gonna quit your job?" And I would always say, "I got $30,000 in my advance," which after agent and taxes was $13,000. So
yeah.
when that's just a crazy thought that I would quit my job for $13,000.
Right, and people don't realize that it's actually very hard to make money as an author of books in general, unless
it's nearly impossible.
Yeah. Well, like you, like let me just ask, how many speaking gigs have you done in the past year?
Probably 60.
Yeah, so you got to do a lot of work on top of writing books to, essentially have your dream job, which is kind of the essence of all your works, which is how to go from kind of the day job to the dream job, or, through all these different, essentially the arc of your books. That's the story I see.
Yeah, 100%. And there's so much of that you don't get to see because, Instagram looks a certain way. And then the reality is you're doing a lot of stuff that you wouldn't qualify as like, this is dreamy.
Well, yeah, because 60 talks, like I do a lot of speaking, and I think I would get really burnt out giving 60 talks in a year.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I mean, the thing for me is I've started to do meetups before the talks. So in addition to doing the talk, I'll say to the internet, "Hey, I'm going to be at this spot at 7 a.m. Let's get together." And I get to connect with people and share ideas and hear their ideas. So I love I'm an introvert in that I like one-on-one, I get really awkward. But in a crowd, I really enjoy that.
I'm almost the reverse. Like in a crowd, I don't know what I would do. Like going from meetups to talks to dinners to meetups, it's too much. I would get tired.
Yeah, and some of it I do get tired of it. But I think the thing for me, I love to make people laugh. And you know the space I'm in. Everybody is like, a lot of people are super boring, and they write boring books challenging you to have an exciting life. And it's just, so for me, the chance to get to show up and tell some jokes and hopefully challenge some people, I just have a good time doing it. So I I'm definitely a writer who speaks, not a speaker who writes. And so writing's my first kind of priority, but the rest of it I really enjoy too.
And you also do radio. I've seen you on your Dear John segments.
Oh yeah. We've done a couple of those. It's all that stuff is fun. And I was really excited about this talk because I think there's a ton of overlap. I was reading what you wrote about self-sabotage recently. And as a guy who's got a book coming out right now, like what a perfect time for me to pull some self-sabotage. And I thought that was a great idea you shared.
Well, what's an example where you've self-sabotaged yourself? Because everyone has examples of it.
I think there's a lot of examples. One is that I never was really into email, like marketing and having an email list. And I would make up all these excuses like, oh, it's so like nobody cares about email. And it was just because I was lazy and didn't know how to do it. So I'd focus on like the kind of candy of like, I'm on Twitter and look at me building Twitter. And now I'm like 8 years late to the have an email list conversation. And I really self-sabotaged that part of being able to reach out to people.
Well, one thing I can say, it's never too late. I self-sabotage myself in that way as well. I felt like, oh, everybody's already got like 1 million people on their list. I'm never going to build a list. And everybody was telling me to start one. This was about 2 or 3 years ago. And I started one, and there's all sorts of ways to grow it. Like you offer free giveaways and so on, and you grow your list, and eventually it becomes a powerful tool.
Yeah, and I've started one, and I'm slowly building. I think another self-sabotage is when you create something and you're afraid to share it with people because you think you're going to become this self-promotional jerk. Like we always think of the most extreme person we know, and then we go, I wrote a book. I don't want to bother people. I don't want to tweet too much about it. And I think I think there's a temptation for me to self-sabotage that way.
Well, let's talk about that because your career, your book, your most recent book, Do Over, is about something that everybody is going through now in this economy. Like we're all jumping not only from job to job, but industry to industry and career to career. And you discuss kind of a method. A positive method of doing this. You build your career savings account, you discuss, and Do Over is sort of about how you build this and how you make it work for you. And I want to talk, though, specifically about when you have made these career jumps. So, like, you went from auto trader to suddenly you were kind of like you had 1 foot in auto trader and 1 foot in the motivational space. How did that kind of come about?
It was slow at first. I would go do speaking gigs with vacation days.
So why did you think you could? Why did you think you could be motivational?
I think that's a good question. I mean, sometimes I think I'll see like a 22-year-old life coach, and I'll be like, "That's a weird thing to be at 22, a life coach." But no, I've always felt motivational that way, and I started to my first motivation was, "Hey, here's how to balance your day job and your dream job." And I spoke from my experience because that's what I was doing. And so I think the books I like to write are from the trenches where I go, hey, I went through this thing and here's a lot of ways I did it incorrectly. And here's a handful that I felt like it went well. What's your experience been? So I started to do that at Auto Trader and started to see, some lessons and started to figure out, I'm doing radio interviews during lunch breaks, in my car, and I'm doing all this stuff on the side of my job, and it starts working. And I wonder if there's other people that would like to try this too.
What do you mean it starts working?
Well, it starts working in the sense of like the one free gig turns into, you do a bunch of free speaking gigs, and then I eventually start getting relationships where people are like, hey, we have a handful of dollars and would like you to speak here. Would you like to do that? And I was like, I like handfuls of dollars. That sounds great. And it starts building slowly.
Well, I think that's an interesting theme that runs through a lot of my guests, which is that you kind of have to give before you receive. And I think you sort of show, okay, you're at autotrader.net doing whatever, or autotrader.com doing whatever, and you start speaking, doing this free stuff because people want content. They don't care where you come from. If you're good content for their audience, they want you. And then eventually they pay you.
Yeah, and if you're consistent.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you consistently give the same level of content, and you're consistently going, like when I first started my blog, which wasn't even an original idea, there was stuff white people like, this satire of Caucasia, and it always bummed me out that Christians rip off popular culture and put a little God flavor on it and say like got milk becomes got God. So I thought, why don't I talk about that problem by committing that problem? And I thought I'd write about it for a week, and it started to grow. I had 4,000 people show up on like day 9. And so I would do 4 or 5 blog posts a day on that blog at the beginning to kind of really create some content. And now as far as giving away free stuff, like all the meetups I do are, again, me saying, hey, I'm going to, like, I did one in Gilbert, Arizona at a barbecue restaurant like on Monday. And I got there and it was awkward because it was really crowded. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to stand in this corner and hopefully these 50 people that came from the internet to hear me share some ideas, and I want to hear their ideas, like we'll figure it out over the sound of a loud barbecue restaurant. And that wasn't a paid event. And I did probably 30 of those last year, or 30 of those in the last 2 years. And it's that free stuff where you go, you give and you give and you give. And I think you're right.
Well, but you said, though, in terms of consistency, and I think you mentioned this in Quitter as well, that you would, and maybe it was you who mentioned this, that you would almost sometimes obsess, like, is the quality staying up on the blog? Like, are people going to just suddenly drop off if I have one bad blog post? And this does become an obsessive thing for bloggers, and I wonder if it's true. Like, I wonder if, yes, when you have a bad post, you might lose some people, but when you have a good post, you're either going to get them back or you're going to get more new people back. So I wonder if, like, an obsession on the highest possible quality is not giving yourself enough permission to do the occasional lower quality but more experimental things you might be thinking about.
Oh, 100%. I think the problem is the bigger your audience, the more you're afraid to lose it. Like, because if you have 5 readers, you can go crazy all you want because you're like, I can find 5 more people. If you have 500,000 readers, there's a part of you, if you're not careful, you start to just write what you think they want you to write because you're afraid to lose 500,000 people.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I think every blogger goes through that. And I think, how would you recommend not feeling those feelings?
Yeah, if I figure that out, I'd tell you. Like, people always go, where do you come up with your ideas about fear? And I go, I'm afraid of a lot of things, and then I write them down. So I think for me, some of it is not reading, certain comments. If when I get negative feedback, maybe there's these people that are really strong and can just bounce it off them like Superman. I obsess about it if I'm not careful. And I research that person's life and just it becomes this rabbit hole. And so some of it for me is writing as if I don't have an audience and writing quickly so that the fear kind of can't catch up. And then, sharing it before I've critiqued it to death.
Well, it's funny, and I was just talking to my wife about this because I got some negative comments yesterday that I really didn't like. And there's an evolutionary aspect of this. If you kind of go into the jungle and to your left you see an apple tree and to your right you see a lion, the survivors, your ancestors, noticed the lion and ignored the apple tree. Or else they wouldn't be your ancestors. So we have this evolutionary bias to pay a lot more attention to the negative feedback our brain shows us.
Well, and the reality is that the feedback you got yesterday wasn't something trying to physically eat you. Like, none of the feedback, at least in what you and I do, nobody is trying to murder us. Hopefully. I talked to a cab driver in Houston. I said, oh, where are you from? He said, I'm from Iraq. And I just said, you ever get to go back? And he said, no, they're trying to kill me. And when somebody says that, you ask a follow-up. And so Al-Qaeda had tried to assassinate him like a handful of times. And I thought, okay, I was just about to tell this dude about somebody on Twitter who was mean to me, like really mean. And at the end of the day, you and I don't have lions. We have difficult situations. But if you keep it in perspective, hopefully you're able to laugh at it and go, those 4 people, Mark Dragonheart _7, whatever.
Well, okay, so let's talk about difficult situations. So you're at Auto Trader, and this went from being maybe a nice job for you to being a difficult situation. Like, you were traveling all over the place, you were working on your blog and then your book, and you couldn't do everything. But at the same time, like, a lot of people say to me, oh, I have an idea. When should I raise money and quit my job? And the answer is, don't quit your job. Like, you need to go through that experience of having a crappy job while working on your dream idea. And you definitely went through that. And like, what was the path of getting you ultimately more and more to your dream situation?
Well, the first part was writing the blog. And so like getting up early before work to write. I mean, you and I are so aligned on that idea. I meet so many people that go, I want to be a writer. And I'll say, well, do you write before work? And they go, no. Or do you write at night? No. Do you go to writing conferences on the weekend? No. Do you read books about writing? No. Well, then you don't want to be a writer. Like
Right.
You like the word writer, just none of the action, which is unfortunate because that's where it happens. And so people think they'll quit their jobs and then they'll do all this hustle, and you can do both. And so I just started to get up at 5 a.m. and work on things before I went into work. And it actually made me a better employee because I wasn't holding Auto Trader accountable to letting me write a ton. I had already done it for the day. Like I felt like, okay, I've already scratched that itch. And so I started to do that on the side, started to use vacation days to go to speaking gigs. And I got my first book deal in large part because of my blog traffic.
And now you say nobody's tried to kill you, but stuff Christians like must have pissed off a lot of Christians.
Yeah, and we're a difficult crowd. The challenge for, as a Christian is that when I share an idea with a business community, the business community they critique the idea. When I share it with a Christian audience, they critique my soul. And it becomes this very personal kind of thing. And so, yeah, there were a handful of people that didn't understand I was joking. I remember I did a blog post about, I was pretending to judge people that use the table of contents to look up things in the Bible because it means they don't read it enough. And I said, I personally took mine out and I rolled it up into a shofar horn, like the Israelites, to blow when I call my kids down to family devotionals. Now, clearly I'm not doing that. And somebody was like, how dare you? And really got mad. And I felt empathy for that person because they grew up somewhere where they were that judged and their Christianity was that unfun that they thought I was saying that seriously.
But did anyone ever do like a post what John Acuff likes and like totally skewer you?
Oh yeah, totally. A handful of people did that, and would say or I remember somebody wrote me a radio person wrote me an email and said, "Do you have a theologian read everything you write before you post it?" And that was such a passive aggressive yeah, I have a pocket theologian, and I have a professional theologian whose life is so wasted that I send him all my posts about rolled up shofar horns. Like, yes, of course I'm clearing everything through a theologian. That's how a blog works. I was like,
but it sounds like you deal with a lot of the hate with humor. Like you figure out a way to kind of like, twist it around. Eventually
I do. In the moment, I deal with it with, paralyzing frustration that prevents me from being creative.
Yeah, because there's no. I think it was Stephen Pressfield who says, "Don't take the drama. Drama should happen on the page, not in your life." And so, when you are frustrated or anxious about something, that does take away from the writing. There's no kind of romance to drama in life if you want to be a writer.
No, it steals the creativity, and it sucks it away. But I do think that part of how I like to write is that I'm either going to have success or a story. Like, it's either going to work or I'm going to get a story out of it. And I think, for me, listening to you talk to Brian Kopelman on his podcast and then when you had him on yours and talking about your story and the things that have worked or the relationships that fell apart that didn't work and the story that came out of that, I think you're the same kind of writer. And so for me, I remember I did a big meetup in 2008, or I thought it was going to be big, which was such an ego play. And I told all these people, like, it's going to be huge. And my in-laws were excited. They printed up 1,000 stickers for me to give out. And I didn't even have a book at the time. So there's nothing to sign. And I thought the line would be so long that people would need something to do while they waited to, I guess, bask in my glory. And I made a quiz for them to fill out while they waited. And I waited in that room for 90 minutes and 2 people came. And one was a friend who came to encourage me. And the other one was some dad that said, "Hey, my daughter likes your blog. Here, call her." And I had this 30-second awkward conversation. And I felt like a huge loser, but I had my friend take a photo of me in this sea of empty chairs. And then I turned it into this blog post, and I turned it into this idea and shared about that, because so often we only share about the success stuff. And I just think that creates this huge myth for people that are really in the trenches trying to do something.
It's funny because I actually never blog about success stuff. It's only negativity that creates a good story. Think about every story you've ever read in your life. Like, something bad happens to the main character, and he has to resolve it one way or the other by the end.
Yeah, the good stories never start with, "So I was born rich." you know, and you go like, oh, that's amazing. Like, I want to hear Donald Trump's story about being born rich. That's fascinating. No, and the other thing is that, like, the failure, the hardship, that stuff's relatable because everybody's had a moment like that. And again, like, I think it's important that you continue writing those kind of things because the internet creates this weird focus where, like, people look a certain way on Instagram. Everybody posts the, like, here's my office today picture where it's like them overlooking the ocean. And they never post the reality of, like, here I am in Cleveland, Ohio, and in Hampton Inn overlooking the highway. And this is where I'm writing my book today because I'm on the road, you know. And so I think you need a balance.
So I want to kind of summarize your career just real quickly, and then I have a bunch of questions about it. You went from, you know, auto trader to working at with Dave Ramsey, who's this enormous, you know, financial self-help motivational guy. He had a show on Fox Business. He has tons of books. He speaks everywhere. He was helping you build your platform while you were writing, you know, at least Quitter and Start. And I don't know if you started writing Do Over with him or that maybe.
No, that came after.
So then you left his organization, and maybe that was the impetus for Do Over because you suddenly had to do over what he had created for you. And in Do Over, I kind of want to, you know, right in the beginning, you kind of get to the meat of it, which is you have this, you know, concept you call the career savings account, which is a function of the relationships you've built plus your skills plus your character times hustle. So, you know, obviously you must have built great relationships when you were working with Dave Ramsey and doing all your books and stuff. You probably built up great skills like watching his organization in action, and he has a great organization underneath him. You obviously have character that you've built up over the years, and you write for a Christian audience, and for I sort of feel like you write for everyone. I don't know if Christians is something you limit yourself to. Your last 3 books are for everyone.
Yeah, the last 3 books have been business books, and so that was a do-over. That was, my first book was a Christian satire, and then I really was deliberate to say, okay, I'd love to be on a business shelf.
Yeah, but even Dave kind of somewhat writes for I don't want to say he writes for a Christian audience, but he addresses that audience.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the events are held in churches. When he speaks, and that's the biggest part of the platform is they do Financial Peace University in churches.
So did leaving his organization inspire you to do over?
Oh yeah, I wrote this book because I needed it first. The transition from that was massive, and the first 6 months I didn't leave with something to do next. I just knew it was time for me to do something different. And so, yeah, I wrote the book because I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I navigate a transition? And then I started to wonder, are other people having the same experience and what's working for them? So yeah, Do-Over wasn't on the list of things I wanted to write. It was when I got out of that job, I thought, okay, let me look at life.
Well, let me ask you this. Like often, I've been kind of blogging in the particular style that I blog in for, let's say, 5 or 6 years. And often I have to really stretch to find, new stories about how, or new ways to describe about what's happened to me in the past. And, I'm constantly searching my own life for content. Did you come to a point, and maybe you came to this point when you were still at Dave Ramsey's organization, did you come to a point where you felt like you couldn't just say the same things over and over again, and then you felt such a need to say something new that you left? Because I don't think you've ever really talked about why you left Dave Ramsey.
No, I think that was part of it. I mean, I think if you read Start, there's some of that where it was, my story at the time was I had been given this great amount of success by being on his platform, and that's a difficult story to relate to in a lot of ways. I mean, it would be really dishonest of me, James, to ever sell like a PDF on like how to become a big author, because step 1 should be connected to a guy who has 7 million radio listeners. Like that, how dare me not acknowledge that's part of the story. I don't know that I left, I don't think I'd ever say I left to create the content, but I think I did realize there were 2 kind of roads going in different directions. And I knew which one I was supposed to be on. And it's not easy to leave somewhere where you've got the most money you've ever had and the most fame you've ever had and the most attention. But if it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do.
Well, how did you define right thing? Like the night before you left his organization, and you just said this was clearly like the best situation you had been in, at least from a career point of view. So picture the night before you left his organization. You and your wife, I imagine, were discussing it, and maybe you were discussing it with other friends or colleagues. Like, what was going through your mind?
Just raw amounts of terror. Just like super anxious. We didn't sleep well for 6 months, before or after this decision. And that's part of the myth of bravery is people think it feels good. It doesn't. It feels like not sleeping or wanting to throw up or, being anxious. And so a big part of it was I had gotten wise counsel from people, like people that could tell me the truth and knew me well enough. And, it wasn't like it was this, overnight decision. I felt, of course I felt, just overwhelmed. Even if it's the right decision, if it's a big decision like that, where there's not a going back moment, it's scary.
I mean, well, what were the factors? Because I've been through some decisions like that before in the past, and it's never black or white. There's huge gray area.
Sure.
So when I left, I had a great job that I loved. In the 90s, I worked at HBO, and then I left to start my own business. And that was an incredibly complicated decision. It took me 18 months, basically, to make that decision. What were some of the factors in your decision of why you left?
Well, I really wanted to be the best writer that I could be. And I felt like working with a New York publisher, really being deliberate about the publishing process would help me become a better writer. And that I'd have more freedom to do that on my own. So becoming the best writer became something that really mattered to me. My wife said, "Do you want to be great or just greatly known?" And that was kind of a punch in the stomach moment, of am I trying to get really popular or do I really want to be great at the craft of what I care about? And you can, I think you can become great and become greatly known. I think it's hard to go the other way. I don't know that Kim Kardashian will ever do a craft, or ever lean into it, because she's already greatly known. And so that was a question that I asked. And then I just started to be like, that organization is so full of entrepreneurs and kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that it was hard not to want to do my own thing. And I never would have self-identified as an entrepreneur until that season. And it was like a greenhouse moment, where I started to see the tools that I needed to try it on my own existed in a way that I didn't feel like they had, in the same way. And I started to think, okay, I want to be able to have the freedom to explore the next creative thought in the way that I can. And part of the benefit of being with a big organization is that you have a whole team pushing behind you. And one of the challenges is that there's expectations of a whole team.
But here's an organization where they actually paid you to do what you love. Like paid you to write books and speak. And, again, do you think maybe there was an element of self-sabotage there leaving that organization, particularly fairly quickly? Like you were there a few years, but not like you hadn't built a career there yet.
Yeah, I think there's things I look back now 18 months later that I would definitely do differently. I think
what?
I got entitled. I got entitled to the stuff that was happening as if I had created it. Whether it was, the access to the team, the talented people that would work there. And I felt like now I look back and I go, wow, I was really a jerk in some situations where I didn't see all the hard work that was going into, say, like the Start book launch. Where now that I'm out on my own and I've got, a great team in Penguin and other people, but like, I did an event yesterday and I was at Costco buying brownie bites and cookies for the event because I'm in charge of catering when I throw an event because I'm just a guy. And so I think there were times that I got lost in that and didn't see all the people that were working really hard on stuff for projects that I wasn't paying their salaries. Dave was, because he built this team. So that'd be one thing I'd do differently.
It's funny because, so I've, run various companies, both good and both for better or for worse. And I always call entitlement the disease. So once an employee gets the disease, they basically have to be fired immediately.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Because they're never going to, you weren't going to solve your entitlement issue while you were there. That's probably true.
No, and I had, it's taken me 18 humbling months to kind of work through that.
What's been humbling about it? Like you said, you had to buy the cookies for these, events, but what else? Like, have you ever had a moment where you figured, hey, maybe I should just pick up the phone and try to get that job back, or no?
No, I've had fear, definitely, because I think in every big decision there's fear, but I haven't had regret, and I think they're different. And so I've always known that was the right decision. But in moments when it hasn't been easy, like I rebuilt my blogs, and that wasn't easy. I relaunched one, and that, to tell you the truth, I got to skip some levels because of the relationship there, where I went from speaking to 80 people to 8,000 in a month because Dave said, hey, come on this stage I've built. And that's where part of the entitlement was. Like, where I skipped some of you're bringing 40 books and you're trying to sell them yourself and you're setting everything up. And so those are things I look back on and go, oh, good grief, like the ego.
But okay, so yes, the entitlement's a problem, but I don't necessarily agree with the fact that you skipped some levels, because clearly Dave hired you for a reason. You said no twice to job offers there, and only the third time you said yes. It's because you knew what value you were bringing, and Dave brought you on, and that value paid off for him as well.
Yeah, and I do agree with that, and I think there's probably a level of false humility in that I feel like I'm good at what I do. There's a handful of things that I think I do really well at. And public speaking is one that I've worked really hard on. It wasn't, I don't show up that day to do it. It's been a process. So it definitely benefited, both of us. I mean, both of us got something out of it. But what I mean by that is, like, even just the email example, I didn't go through the process of growing that slowly, or I didn't have what I think are some kind of learn how to do something moments. And now that I'm out on my own, I'm having them. And it's weird because the perception of my platform is different than some of the reality. And that people go, oh, you got a New York Times bestseller. Like, what's your assistant team like? What's your, how many staff do you have? And people send me their resume to work on for my company. And it's me and my wife in our kitchen. I think I'll have to pull up another chair. And so I just think there's some basic running a business things that I'm learning that feel very much like kindergarten.
Well, now let's reel it all the way back. Where are you from initially?
North Carolina, but I grew up in Massachusetts.
So you grew up from ages what to what in Massachusetts?
First grade to college, and then I moved back after college for about 3 or 4 years.
And you were in Alabama for a while, right?
Yeah, I went to school in Birmingham.
Yeah, so how many people who grow up in Massachusetts say to themselves, boy, I really want to go to college in Alabama?
It's very popular. People say, I got to get to Alabama, is the phrase. There's T-shirts. It says, go Red Sox, and the back says, get me to Bama.
Right.
Yeah. No, I got rejected from UNC. It's where my dad went, my mom went, and I was out of state and didn't have the GPA or the class ranking to get into University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I started looking at a bunch of different schools and really liked this school in Birmingham. And my dad's a pastor, and they had a great scholarship for pastors' kids. And financially, like, I don't know, maybe pastors these days are rich. Like, we did not grow up with like sweet pastor cash. And so he thought that would be good. And so I ended up going down to Birmingham and ended up loving it.
And when you got there, were you like the only kid and the only freshman who was from Massachusetts?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Did people like beat you up?
No, but I was confounded why strangers wanted to know how my day was going. Like nobody at the grocery store in Massachusetts is like, how's your day been today? And if you said that at Stop and Shop in Peabody, Mass, people would be like, what's it to you? And so like on campus, it was really weird when people, like random people, were like, hey, how are you? I was kind of standoffish, like, why do you care? And maybe that's not a Massachusetts thing. Maybe I just didn't have the right attitude.
No, I do think that's a North versus South thing, in part. So, but I would imagine though people maybe thought you. Here's my assumption, and I could be totally off base. I would imagine that the average person who you dealt with, when they found out you were from Massachusetts, probably thought you were looking down on them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And my freshman year was insane. I went to an all-boys Catholic school, high school, from sophomore to senior year because I didn't do well freshman year in public school, and I kind of won like a free trip to Catholic school for my parents. And so I had that experience, and then I came down, and freshman year I got a 2.4 first semester, and I was going to lose my scholarships unless I got a 3.0. And so over winter, I just created like this. I remember thinking, I'm going to be perfect next semester because I have to be. And I created this like perfect version of myself, and I ended up getting a 4.0 and like a 3.01 average for the year. And people would come up to me and go, I like you so much better than last semester. Like, you were a real jerk. And so freshman year was an interesting experience.
And then, so what happened? So you graduate college, a few years later. What was your first thing that you did?
I interned at an ad agency in Birmingham. I love to write. Advertising is still one of my favorite things because I always tell people, like, if you want to know how to motivate people, read great ads. Or like a great way for a small business to understand a community is to find somebody speaking to that community and then re-engineer the ad, like reverse engineer it and go, they spent millions to say these words. Why did they say these words? What do they know? Like, how they can afford focus groups. I can't. And so I fell in love with advertising during school and worked at an ad agency. And then I got tired of that and ended up moving back home to Massachusetts and worked at another one and got fired from that one.
Why'd you get fired?
I was just a terrible employee. I just didn't know how to have a job. I really was just lazy and kind of some of that entitlement again. And then I got a job at Staples and was one of their first writers for Staples.com. And this was back, you remember these days when they're like, everybody who touched the internet is going to make $10 million. And I remember we were going to take Staples.com stock public. And this guy said to me, you'll remember this day when you're sitting on a boat in 10 years. And it never went public. And like all the snacks that they gave the .com division, we knew the economy was challenging based on the frequency and quality of the snacks that we got in our free snack area for the .com division. Because eventually it went from like every couple hours they were giving you more food to like once a day to like once a week somebody put a Snapple in like the fridge by the .com department.
It's funny that they thought you needed sugar, like just like how parents kind of feed their kids.
Oh, yeah, well, they did that, and we had a playroom. They were like, we're going to design a really cool play space, but because it didn't have walls and it was open, it eventually became the judge people who are goofing off space. Like, you would stand up and see who was playing air hockey and be like, look at that guy. So lazy.
Well, so you're at Staples.com. You know, the interesting thing about advertising, I think people think there's a big difference between advertising writers and, let's say, Ernest Hemingway. But there's really not like a huge gap in the sense that both sides of that gap are trying to convey a message as simply as possible so it can be read by people who will buy into that vision.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, one of the best things I've ever read was an ad, and it was Range Rover. And it had, I think, 10 characters, and all it said was not a, the. And with that one line, not a, the, they communicated blue blood and polo and wealth, and you want to be part of this. And it was brilliant, and it was 10 characters. So I think there's a lot of creativity and beauty that goes into advertising.
Yeah, because you're it's like on Twitter, you're given limited space, but you have to say something meaningful. So every word has to be the tip of an iceberg, and if it's a quality ad or quality content, there's a huge iceberg underneath that nobody can see, but it's there. And if it isn't quality, if there isn't a strong vision behind it, then all there is really is the tip of the iceberg, and that's the entire iceberg for each word.
Oh, without a doubt. I love the idea of the best stories are the ones you write for yourself. And by that, I mean, like, there's a headline that's a catalyst for a memory you have. Like, you have decades of personal James vocabulary I don't have access to. But if I, as a writer, can start the story and leave enough room for you to tell yourself the story with your memories and your ideas, like most blog writers, most book writers, they make it so full about themselves, there's nowhere for me to tell my story. But if I can do that and say, okay, this is a line about running off the the road and this is about you and your daughter and it's icy and you've gone off into somebody's yard and you're stuck and it becomes this community neighborhood thing and I can kind of trigger that and evoke that, then like it's completely different.
Yeah, great. Oh, and I see you've been reading my blog. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So then you're going, you eventually make your way back down south. You're at Auto Trade, but something's still bothering you. And I think what's interesting in your story, a lot of people they feel they have like dead end jobs, but they just don't know what to do next. Like they don't know what career or what their passion is, but you kind of had this passion from the beginning. You wanted to write, you wanted to speak, and really based on what I see in your books, you wanted to be a combination of motivational and use your skills at humor and so on. And you were able to make that jump, but it took a while and it was hard.
Yeah, it's taken a long time, and it's not,
and you're still doing it.
I'm still doing it. I still the meetup ended up being great, but on Monday it was awkward to show up to that barbecue restaurant and try to figure it out. People had to wait an hour in line before they could come back and hang out. And so you're not done. Like that's why you got to find something where if the money doesn't show up as fast as you want, and it never does, or the results or the affirmation, or like you can't do it for that because you'll stop as soon as that stuff doesn't show up.
Well, that's a good point because that's true. I would say every single guest I've ever had on this podcast, that's what they would have said, because none of them sort of showed up and were instant successes. Like, look, I've interviewed Brian Koppelman. You've been on his podcast. He was an entertainment lawyer in the record industry for years, and then spent like 3 or 4 years trying to figure out what his first movie he would write would be.
And then did the comedy thing for a year and a half to try to get unstuck. And so, all those, I think people hate that part of stories, but it's true. Like, I spent 4 years in in journalism school. I've been writing professionally full time for 16 years. And so it's the other side of, it's fun to go, hey, here's the book, and it's never fun to talk about the 16, but I think that's the stuff that makes it matter. So later on, so then you jump to Dave Ramsey's organization, great stuff is happening, you decide to leave. Why have you never really talked about why you left? Part of it was there was, HR contracts and it was privacy and there was things that, like leaving another job, there's just things that you don't get to talk about. And that was one of the hard parts, was that most of my story, at least blogging wise, had been, hey, here's what's going on in my life. Here's honesty and transparency. And then that happened. And out of respect for the relationship I had and also contractually, I had to be really careful about that. And plus I had benefited tremendously from that relationship and had a good 3 years there. And so that was hard right after that, because the audience, rightfully so, said, hey, wait a second, you're the guy that shares everything and now you're not sharing this.
Yeah. So how did you deal with that?
Poorly? Is that, I don't know if that's a long enough answer. It's been challenging, and I'm able to talk a little more about it and say,
because
hey,
everyone, and I'm sorry to interrupt, because everyone's going to just start. It's like you said earlier, everyone's going to start filling in the blanks, but here you haven't given enough information, so the blanks can go all over the place.
Yeah, that's the thing I learned, is that in the absence of a story, people will write their own.
That's a good way to put it.
I had to get okay with that. And it becomes like worrying about what people think of you and don't think of you, where people started to kind of make up their own stories. And it's frustrating, but I understand it. Like I completely understand it. And so I've tried my best to, out of respect for the organization and for all the people that I still love that work there, to say, hey, it was a great opportunity. I'm doing this other opportunity. And they go, well, we want exact details. And for me, like at the end of the day, they wanted to play football and I wanted to play basketball, and it doesn't make football good or bad. I mean, the reality is, to be honest with you, James, I don't write anything about finances. That's never been what I'm good at, what I care about, what I'm passionate about. The name of their building was Financial Peace Plaza. They were a finance-based company. So even when I took that job, a lot of my friends said, wait, what? What, like, how did you, like, okay, so you're going to be the artist in that building? Okay. Like, well, we'll see how that goes. And so eventually those differences, even though there were good stuff that was happening, And there's a part of me that I'm writing all these books daring people to be brave and take risks. And there's, for me anyway, I had to try that.
Well, and it's interesting because I hate the phrase personal finance because I think that's just a made up. Me personally, I think that's a made-up field. There is no such thing because it changes so much over the years. And I think the direction you're going with your books is where the economy's going, which is just that people can't just think of their job as this lifetime adventure. You're going to have to do over many times in your life. You're going to have to be a quitter many times in your life, not in a negative sense as you put, and you express this. It's not a negative way to put it, but you're going to have to quit, restart, do over, and that's really what personal finance has become now.
Yeah, and for me, that is that sense of like the gold watch days are gone, and the sooner you kind of accept that and see the fun in that, and the joy in that, then I think you get to kind of experience it and go, all right, there's a lot that's interesting. The other thing for me, though, is we've got this kind of entrepreneur glorification culture right now where I meet people that feel guilty that they're not starting their own business. And my whole thing is the 70% of Americans who are dissatisfied with work, 100% of them are not meant to start businesses.
I totally agree with that, by the way. Being an entrepreneur sucks. Like, it sucks really bad. Like,
I'm so glad to hear you say that.
No, I mean, I have only been suicidal in my life when I've been running a business. Yeah. So what people don't realize is that having multiple sources of income is different from having a job, but it's also different from being a pure entrepreneur where you start a business and now you've created your own job. Like having multiple sources of income like books, speaking, maybe selling other products or information products or advice or whatever, that's a different kind of career that people are starting to do now, and is this, I think, a better way to be independent.
Oh, I love it. And, the reality is if one of those things goes away or goes through a season where it's not working, there's other things to kind of support it. I mean, I love kind of figuring out my career that way, that there's a palette of things that I get to do.
So let's talk about then with Do-Over, you base it on this idea of the career savings account, which I think is really smart. And it's, a function of relationships, skills, character, and hustle. So what are relationships to you?
Relationships to me are just the people that lock arms with you during, a do-over moment. And I really talk about them all the way from casual relationships, which I call boomerang relationships, where they don't end, they just go off in a different direction and you never know when they're going to come back, all the way up to advocates, kind of my phrase for mentor, someone who's 10 years ahead of you and an experience and is able to give you some ideas about where you're headed.
Okay, and then, there's this notion of I saw a study recently about strong ties versus weak ties. So your weak ties maybe are like your Twitter followers or Facebook friends, but they're not, let's say, relatives, which are your strong ties. But it turns out that people's weak ties are far more powerful in terms of forming revenue opportunities than your strong ties for some reason.
Oh yeah, and that's the whole point of the kind of the boomerang casual relationships. I mean, one that's been awesome for me is I interacted with Southwest on their Twitter account, and we joked back and forth, and they became kind of a friend, like the person running it. And I had him come to this dinner that my wife and I were doing in Dallas, and I got to meet him. And then around the time of the book coming out, he said, "Hey, would you like to be in the magazine that's in 500,000 seats of every plane that we have and have a full-page story about your new book? Like, would that be helpful?" And I was like, "I guess." And it became, it was out of this casual Twitter relationship. So there's been a million of those little stories where I go, wow, it's like I might not see that guy every day, but that was a really fun thing that we got to do together.
And how would you recommend people cultivate, like, let's say that's a seed that you planted, like, how would you recommend people start to cultivate those?
We'll see, like, this is where, again, like, we've got great overlap in that part of the character part is generosity. And you preach, which I love, the idea of give those ideas to somebody. Like, if you've got ideas, give them to somebody else. Let them use them.
Right.
So for me, the generosity of going, okay, I'm going to, there's the bravery aspect. I'm going to go to this meetup, or I'm going to go do this thing that feels uncomfortable, but welcome to trying to chase your life, like chase a dream. Like if you want less awkwardness in your life, just accept the day job and phone it in for 40 years and move to Florida. If you want, more awkwardness, try to do something like this. And so putting yourself out there and going, hey, I have some ideas, giving those ideas to somebody else in a way that they can receive them. You start relationships that way. Or even, I'll meet sometimes, and I'm sure this happens to you, people say, hey, John, like I'll never have met him before. They'll go, will you mentor me? And that's like asking a stranger, like, will you marry me? And the far better question is, what's one book you'd recommend I read? Like, I really like the way you think. What's one book I should read? And you start a relationship that way. And maybe you earn the ability to ask them one other question over time. And I think that, you're natural, like I feel like you work hard at that kind of thing. And I think that when people do, they start to figure out these casual relationships, and you don't know where it's going to go. Like somebody you worked with 5 years ago, James, you might see next week and they go, hey, I've got this opportunity, and you came to mind for some reason. You go, awesome. We haven't talked in 5 years, but let's do it.
Well, I actually go back through my emails. Like, let's say I started Gmail around 2008 or 2007, I forget what year. And I'll go back to my earliest emails, and I'll find an email chain that I never responded to, and I'll respond as if it was that day, like that I got the last email. And that's usually a great way to jumpstart these relationships again.
I love it. That is, yeah, I've heard you talk about that before, where you'll respond to somebody that they'll ask you for a question, and I think that's great. So you do little things like that. There's a woman I put in the book, Sarah Harmeyer. She had her dad build a 20-person table in her backyard in Dallas, and she wanted to meet her neighbors, and so she invited them to dinner, and 91 people walked down the driveway.
Wow.
And so she started this thing called Neighbors Table, and since then she served dinner to 2,000 people in her backyard. And West Elm has gotten excited about it. She's done some Neighbors Table in West Elm. And it's, when you had Seth on the second time on your podcast, you asked him this question, okay, like I'm an average person, what do I do? And I think he used cricket as an example, where here's like, you put yourself out there, you start a cricket blog. And then, like maybe in 6 months you're selling antique, vintage cricket sticks. And it's that kind of thing. You put yourself out there.
Yeah. Well, okay. So skills, this leads straight into skills. What are you referring to there?
Well, my big thing is relationships get you the first gig, but skills get you the second. Because, James, if you've got somebody you love and they open a salon, you might go one time for the relationship, but if they suck at cutting your hair, you're not going back a second time. You'll be like, oh, one of my best buddies. I don't want them anywhere near my head with scissors. So you need to develop your skills. And there's really only two types of skills. There's new skills and there's old skills. And I really feel like it takes bravery to develop both, because you won't be good at the thing you have to do that's new. Like I went and spoke to a group of orthodontists out in San Diego, and they're kind of getting stuck right now because to be a modern orthodontist, you have to be good at social media, email marketing, and running a business. And do you know what you don't learn at orthodontic school? Social media, email marketing, and running a business. Right. So if they don't learn those new skills, they're going to get stuck. Their industry is going to leave them behind. Culture is going to leave them behind. So that's what I mean by skills, is the bravery to learn something new. The New York Times talked about that. They asked, why didn't Kodak create Instagram, or why didn't Polaroid create Instagram? And I think a lot of times businesses, especially when they have success, move from innovation mode to protection mode. And there's no more room for innovation.
I think also, like, let's take that orthodontist example. Orthodontists are used to being really good at what they do. Like, let's say, going in the mouth and doing whatever they do. But they suddenly get into this new area that they have to have decent skills at, and they realize that. They're smart enough to realize that, but they're very bad at the skills at first, because you're going to be really bad at something the first time you do it.
Yeah, you should be. And it's not fun in that moment. And what happens is your ego comes in and goes, you're only supposed to do things you're great at. You shouldn't do this. Or you shouldn't have to do this. For me, like, I keep using email marketing as an example, but it's only because I suck at it so hard. And for me, I sent out emails the wrong way, and all these people flagged me as spam. And I wasn't smart enough even to be doing spam. It was just like, I wouldn't have even known how to do that if that was a thing. And they, rightfully so, were like, because I sat on an email list for like 8 months and I didn't email it. And then all of a sudden I was like, hey, I'm back. And a bunch of people were like, no. And it just stuff like that, because I'm not good at it, and things I'm not good at, I don't want to do. Like, it's not comfortable. And I think that's where you have to push through that and go, if I'm going to develop this skill, I've got to be brave.
Well, you know what I've noticed, and maybe the same thing occurs to you through your books and your blog, but I kind of find whatever I write about, it's usually something that I've been so horrifically bad at that I've had to go through so many experiences being bad at it and learning through that now I have material for a book. So my wife and I wrote a book called The Power of No, because we had such a hard time, or I've had such a hard time all my life saying no to people. Like, I was bad at it. So it gave me a great opportunity to try to be good at it by writing a book about it. But I'm wondering if you feel you were good at restarting and doing over, good enough to write a book, or if this has been such a difficult thing that gave you the material to write the book.
I mean, I think I was good at it in the sense of I'd done it once when I moved from Atlanta as kind of the copywriter guy to join Dave Ramsey in Nashville as like a public speaker person. Like, that was a seismic shift. So I think I got some experience then, but no, I think the last 18 months have been like, I wouldn't have written Do Over if I was still there. And once I got out, it was like, okay, now I got to figure this out. So I definitely think that was born from there. I hope though that I don't have to, like, I realize in the writing of this book, sometimes I'm addicted to chaos, and I want to learn, what that means and how to not need to kind of blow up my life to write something.
I don't know if there's a way to, if you're out there doing things that kind of meld you with a lot of people, like all of your readers and your meetups and the people you're speaking to, I don't know if there's a way to avoid chaos.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe that's a pipe dream, the idea of like, I'll get somewhere that's just stable constantly. And so I don't know, maybe I can't define as chaos as the lack, or chaos as stress and challenging times, because writing a book is challenging. Like, writing a good book is challenging. This was the hardest book I've ever written, for a couple of reasons. One, the editor was a fan of good writing, not a fan of me. And that's a big difference. And that was new. There's been times when I've been
by the way, I hate when I have an editor like that. That's the worst.
Yeah, well, because you don't get to use any of your lazy writing things, or any of your, like, you put on some James Charm, like, how you doing,
Right.
And there was none of that. And so she would take 1,000-word sections of the book, like jokes I had told, a funny story. There was this funny story about a rat that I was like, this is going to kill, like, this is an awesome story. And she crossed the whole thing out and said, I'm not a fan of a joke for a joke's sake. It either serves the audience or it moves the narrative forward, and this doesn't either. And I was like, dang. That's kind of that's one of my tricks, is when I'm too lazy to figure out an idea, tell a funny story, mention pop culture, Kesha, tap dance away, you figure it out. And she wouldn't let me do it. And so it is hard to do those things. But it's fun. Like, and the process is better. Like, the book you create at the end of that is better than if you had taken the easy way.
So you kind of cap off this equation by saying it's relationships plus skills plus character, and then the whole thing times hustle. And so how do you define hustle?
I guess I define it in a different way sometimes than most people, because I think hustle has been it's got the worst reputation on the internet right now. Like, every kind of motivational person takes a quote and puts it on top of a Lamborghini photo. And it's like, every day I'm hustling, and they say Abraham Lincoln said that. And you're like, I'm pretty sure that was Rick Ross. Like, that was not Abraham Lincoln. And so
Rick Ross, the rapper, or Rick Ross, the gangster?
Yeah, exactly. The original one that got in trouble. I mean, he kind of brought crack across the country.
Yeah,
Rick Ross, the original one. Yeah.
I'm interviewing him later this month.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I guarantee I won't come up in that interview. He only came up in mine. Like, the chances of him going, well, it's like what John Acuff said. Probably not going to happen.
That's funny.
But yeah, so for me, hustle is about focus, not frenzy. Like, I always like to say it's a scalpel. It helps you kind of remove the stuff you're not supposed to be focused on. And it helps you kind of stay flexible to things as your dream changes, as as the next thing you're going to do kind of clarifies. So that's what I mean by hustle.
Well, that's really interesting, because a lot of people think about bodybuilders. So they would define transformation as, okay, I got bigger. I did more reps and lifted more pounds, and my muscles got bigger. But I think another aspect of transformation that's maybe even more important is subtracting. So instead of adding, subtracting, let's say negative habits or subtracting negative aspects of your life. So when you say this, when you use the scalpel analogy, that's what it makes me think of, that hustle is really kind of taking out areas of your life where you might have been inefficient.
Yeah, inefficient or been making decisions in the wrong way. Like one of the things that I see a lot in culture, it feels like, is that people tweet stuff that's fun to tweet, but it's not necessarily true. Like it's just hooky. So like leaders will do this all the time. And I had a line in my book in Do Over that said, people always remember your generosity and never forget your greed. And my wife said, that's not true. I said, what do you mean? She said, the first half isn't true. People forget generosity all the time. That's the whole concept of people taking, stuff for granted. And she said, I agree that people remember your greed. Like when somebody burns a relationship, you remember that. And so I think that's part of the removing things that you go, I wrote that in there because it was fun to write and I knew it'd get some tweets. But if it's not true and it's not going to help people, I need to edit it out. And you mentioned negative situations. Negative relationships can be like that. Like at every job, everyone who's listening right now that works at a corporation, there's a gossip gang. Like there's this small handful of people that all they do is talk negatively about the experience there. And then if you're part of that and go, wow, it's weird that I feel negative today. No, it's not. Like you've been, hanging out with Sheila all day and she hates this place. So of course you're picking up on that too. And so I think you do remove stuff. And that's kind of some of the power of no, is saying no to those things you're not supposed to do.
What if the negative relationships are like your boss or a family member that you feel like you have to deal with a lot?
Well, so with the boss, I mean, there's a couple things. You can change how you're approaching work. Like maybe your performance will help that relationship somewhat. If it doesn't, every horrible boss is ultimately saying the same thing, and that's, I dare you to leave. I dare you to get another job. Like I dare you to add 4 more revenue streams to what you're working on. And so you get to kind of be frustrated and hurt and wounded, or you get to accept that dare and do the things in the morning or do the things at night or do the things on the weekend that help you leave that boss.
That's a really great way to put it. That's going to be my answer. Now, what if it's a family member?
A family member, part of it is, I think it's our role. Part of our role is understanding they won't understand. In the book, I put a story about seeing a bunch of birds in Rockport, Massachusetts, building nests in lobster cages. And I thought, if you ever asked a lobster if that was a good idea, they'd say, no, that's suicide. Like that's you try to avoid your whole life that moment. But for a bird, it was a perfect house. No cat could get in there. It wasn't going to be moved because it was part of this motif that said, welcome to Rockport. I think a lot of people like you and I, we get these bird kind of ideas and these bird dreams, and then we round up all the lobsters in our lives and are surprised they don't understand it. So to do something new means to be misunderstood. And so you have to kind of go in knowing like, they're not going to understand it, and that's okay. The other thing, you have to watch out for people that say things like, are you still trying to write a book? Are you still a photographer? Because that word still, like those are the things family members who don't understand or friends will sometimes, and that word still is a sharp little dagger.
Well, what if so those are obviously like negative things to kind of avoid, but what if it jumps a level? Like a boss, you can always leave and quit, but a family member is hard to leave and quit. And what if the tensions or the difficulties get so great that it's just kind of, you just don't want to spend any time with that person?
Well, if it's a spouse, I think, you try to go to counseling. You try to work on that, and you try to, because the relationship matters enough that it matters to fix it.
When you're on the road, like doing 60 talks a year and doing all these meetups and stuff, did you ever have tension with, I guess, Jenny is your wife?
Oh yeah, totally. Last fall, I called her from California, and it was the longest trip I've had. I mean, most of the time I try to travel like a SWAT team. Like I get in the city, I get out of the city quickly. Like people who don't do it and are like, did you get to see any of downtown Cleveland, Ohio? You're like, I saw the Hampton Inn. I don't know why I keep using that as my reference. And I saw the airport. But so I called Jenny and I say, hey, we got this great offer next May. It's going to be amazing. It'll cover us financially, which is a conversation you have when you're on your own. And she said, we're fine financially. Like, we're already fine. And then I said, well, now we'll be finer. And she was quiet and said, well, just make sure you earn enough money to buy a new family because this one won't still be around.
Wow.
And she wasn't like, it wasn't yelling. It wasn't like, she wasn't mad. She was just being honest. So yeah, we're working on that. I like to say yes, just like everybody likes to say yes. And there's an ego hit to some of this stuff where like you show up and people tell you you're amazing for an hour and then you go home and like, ooh, that feels amazing. So I'm in the trenches of that right now. I'd be lying if I said I had it figured out, but I think what Jenny and I do have is that we have been to counseling. Like, we've been married 14 years, and I think she has a voice, a strong voice, that there's spaces for her to really speak the truth, you know?
Well, and then what's next? So you have the book Do Over coming out. What do you want to do next? What are you working on?
So I'll start working on the next book probably this fall. But I'm really excited about seeing the reaction to Do Over. I've got I've probably got, I don't know, like 20 things on the calendar as far as speaking engagements. And it's been fun to see businesses and colleges and get to go speak, to different audiences about the Do Over message. But then I'll start working on a book probably in like November, December, January on the next one.
You know what I would suggest too? I don't know how many of these you're doing. Like, obviously you're on my podcast, you're on Brian Koppelman's podcast. You should do as many podcasts as possible, as like quickly as possible. Like, I think podcasts are the podcast tour either replaces or supplements the traditional book tour.
Oh, that's great feedback. Yeah, I've tried to do a bunch of these, and this one, it was one I was really nervous about. This one.
Why were you nervous about this one?
Because you're so smart. Like, I listened to a bunch of your interviews, and like the 10 ideas a day, and I really was. And Brian is the same way. Like, with Brian, I was really intimidated too because he's just so smart. And I don't know. There's times when I feel like, I live in Tennessee. Yeehaw! Like, I'm firing pistols in the air. And like. So before this one, I really, read up on you, did all this stuff, and, that's why I was nervous.
Oh, well, obviously there was no reason to be nervous, so
no, it was great.
I'm a big fan. I watched a bunch of your stuff as well, and your talks, and I've been reading your books, and you're funny, and the books give good advice. Like, I don't see any BS in the books, and you're right, it's not personal finance. It's more about finding ways to reinvent yourself in this economy where things change so quickly. You kind of have to have all these skill sets that people are not used to. So
well, and I think my hope is that the investments in the book you'll take to every job you have. I don't know what work's going to look like for you in 5 years or 5 months, but I know you'll never need a job where they want you to have less skills. Like, you'll never have a job in the future where they're like, we wish you were less connected, So my hope is that regardless of where you are, there's something that applies to you.
Well, John Acuff, thanks so much for coming on my podcast. I really appreciate it. Do Over is the title of the book. What's the actual date that it comes out?
April 7th. So
April 7th. So we'll probably get this podcast out the day the book comes out.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, and again, I really appreciate it. I'm also going to introduce you to a bunch of other podcasters so you can quickly get on some podcasts.
I would love that.
All right, well, thanks a lot, John, and I will talk to you soon. I'm sure we'll run into each other again.
All right, thanks, James.
Thanks.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.